So I'm just really curious. We've had a couple screenings in Wisconsin so far, and I'm really curious in Minneapolis, how many here are Packers fans right now? All right, and now I have to ask, how many people are Vikings fans? Good. I'm really curious what you guys are going to think about this. We don't get as many of you down in Wisconsin, so wonderful. Well, we'll do a Q&A, I think, after this round, and then we also have some cast and crew here, so stick around afterwards and we'll talk some. All right, hope you enjoy it.
When you're still a Packer fan, are you still a Packer fan?
Oh, absolutely. I'll always be a Packers fan.
Perhaps, Tom, maybe you might be able to answer this too, but what, first of all, did you approach Harlan about appearing in the film?
We wanted to, but no, we could not get in touch. He'll basically only say at this point that it was an unfortunate situation. He doesn't really want to get into it. He stayed out of it during that summer and doesn't want to say anything now.
Okay, and that was the second part to my question. Do you think that Harlan owed it to the organization to perhaps be more involved in that situation? And would it have been different, do you think, if Harlan, instead of the president, went down to Gettysburg?
Yeah, no, I think it would have been different. We got a couple different opinions on that. Pete Doherty of the Press-Gazette was very convinced that it would have been handled differently. I guess we'll never really know exactly how. I mean, it's tough for anybody to come into that situation, as Tom said in the film, and deal with that situation as like your first thing on your desk, taking that job. But it's I don't know. I mean, we'll never really know. So.
Do you think people in the organization felt bad that Harlan didn't, come in on the horse?
Well, here's one thing too. I actually talked to Bob Harlan as this thing was going. They do the Packer Caravan all around Wisconsin. I drove to, I think, Oshkosh or somewhere like that in June, like late June, early July. It was right before this, and I actually saw Bob. And so I started talking to Bob. I said, "Can I ask you some questions?" And I asked Bob, what should the organization do about Favre? So at this point, he was already chairman emeritus or whatever he was, and he said, "I don't think Brett really wants to play." Well, that story from the Press-Gazette thing got picked up in USA Today. And that may or may not have been read at some point in Hattiesburg, Mississippi. And so when Harlan did duck in briefly, I don't think that the Packers organization thought it was appropriate. I don't think Bob thought that it was appropriate for him to be stepping on the toes of Mark Murphy. I do think that it would have gone over vastly differently because Bob was so involved with Brett in his career. But yeah, at that point, it was Mark Murphy was the guy. Well, how much do you want the guy who used to have your job stepping in trying to do your job for you? It's one of those kind of awkward things.
Negative fan reaction to Thompson, McCarthy, and Murphy, the three of whom I think are the bee's knees. Do you think the fans have softened with me towards them, or do you think there's still somewhat of a grudge held?
I mean, it's totally split. I mean, the Super Bowl did a lot for them.
I do wonder, had Aaron Rodgers not turned out as... First of all, were there any skirmishes in the crowd here? I want to make sure there's no... I think that had Aaron Rodgers obviously not turned out as good as he has, and had they not won the Super Bowl, I think the story could have been totally different. I don't know how people would think today. I still think there would be a lot of animosity. I think 99% of Packers fans now are probably okay with Thompson, McCarthy, and Mark Murphy. I mean, they won a Super Bowl. Ultimately they won. They were vindicated. Only probably the most diehard Favre loyalists still harbor ill will. But like I said, if it didn't turn out the way it did, if we make this film, it's probably entirely different.
I would also say the Metrodome is one of the only stadiums where they have open seating, and the executives for the Packers sit in the press box. So Ted Thompson and a few other guys from the organization are sitting right behind us. And you had alternately, during that game in 2009, you had Packers fans going up and just screaming at Ted, who's in the second row, just going, "You idiot, what are you doing?" And then you had Vikings fans going, "How do you like this, Thompson? Suck it." So we had both fan bases screaming at him throughout the game and using other words that I won't use here.
And before the Super Bowl, you had all those people that hated Ted Thompson. And he was enemy number one in Wisconsin for driving Brett Favre out. At least it was perceived that way. And then halfway through the Super Bowl season, it started to quiet down. After the Super Bowl, I remember writing about, where are all the Ted Thompson haters now? Winning cures all, just like it did for Brett. It doesn't matter after that. People forget quickly. Look at all the professional athletes that have done horrible things, and you forget about it pretty quickly as a fan.
First of all, as a Vikings fan, job well done on the film.
Wow, really? Thank you.
I can say that objectively. Given how much you guys got to know the Packers organization and the whole Brett Favre saga, what do you think? How long do you think it is before he is honored as a retired Packer at Lambeau?
I mean, that's a tough question to answer. We've gotten this question at every screening we've done, and obviously he'll be in the Pro Football Hall of Fame, and 5 years after at the end of his retirement. I think he's officially retired. I think he's coming back. It's a really difficult question to answer. I think it's going to be sooner rather than later, or at least sooner than people thought at one point. Again, they won a Super Bowl, and I think that quelled a lot of the emotion. Now, that may not be true for everybody. Maybe I'm speaking for myself more so, but I don't think you can forget what he did for the organization. I think it would be silly. I think it would be short-sighted to forget how bad they were for how long, and the fact that without Brett Favre, and I know there are other characters involved, but without Brett Favre, do they have a resurgence? Does any of this happen? To answer your question, who knows? Obviously his relationship with Thompson and McCarthy is probably still icy if there is a relationship. But I think in terms of fans, I think a lot of Packers fans have forgiven to some degree, or at least, as Wayne Larrabee said, we're kind of ready to remember the good times again, so to speak, to remember how much he meant, how good he was. And again, that's you win a Super Bowl, you forget a lot of the ills that happened.
I've always thought it would be 2 years till 2 years after he would be really done. He'd have to be out of the game for 2 years before they'd even think about broaching it. Because don't forget this, after he retired the first time, they scheduled his jersey retirement for the opener against the Vikings. And they printed the tickets before he came back, so everybody was going through. They're trying to forget Brett Favre. They looked down at the tickets, got Brett Favre celebrating in the Packers uniform for that opening game, the first game that he's not there. Also, I'll really quickly add on that,
you don't remembering the good times, or I'll say this, you don't have to forget all of this. You don't have to forget what your opinion of him changed or anything during the summer 2008 to still remember the good times. You can watch those old games now and just be like I've done so recently and during making this, and just being like, I totally forgot. It was so recently, but I totally forgot how amazing he was in a lot of these games. And you can, I don't think you have to completely absolve everything that he potentially handled poorly in order to remember those good times now.
Right, and then I think that the last game that the filmmaker showed here started that healing process. And then I don't know if there'll be an exact moment when the wound finally heals, but when he goes in the Hall of Fame, he's going to go in as a Packer. And so it's going to be that point where everyone's going to go, all right, I remember the good times. And you kind of forget how charming he is as well off the field. And so when he starts talking and telling jokes and stuff, people start to remember the good times, and they kind of forget about all that stuff.
Growing up in Queens, New York, I grew up a Jets fan. So I remember I was at a Brewer game, and the word got out, he's a Jet. I didn't sleep for 3 days. And then he broke my heart.
Hi, I'm a Minnesotan, but Packers fan. Stockholm Syndrome, 15-year Wisconsin boy. My question is, you touched a little bit on the ambiguity of Brett's motivations when he was making the call to walk away or being pushed out or whatever actually happened. And you didn't really touch on his personal records. I know I had the consecutive starts ticking in my head, and I'm wondering if you can talk about that at all as in terms of whether you saw any of that, can he keep the streak going as his motivations?
I guess I would hand this to Tom, because I don't know, maybe he has better thoughts.
Well, you could see him limping off the field after that last game. He's barely able to walk. He goes to the podium 3 days later in a walking cast, and he's limping. And he played 4 days later against New England. The guy was unbelievable in that regard, and his ability to sort of compartmentalize pain. In the end, he had a concussion that, I think it was the concussion that ended up ending the streak. I can't remember. It was something in December. Was it the shoulder? Oh, you talk then. No, because then I just heard he got knocked out of TCFA Stadium. But yeah, all right. Brain's a little fuzzy.
I'm actually from Texas and a Brett Favre fan. And so it's difficult for me to probably grasp the level of mania involved in the whole Minnesota Green Bay thing, because we're Dallas fans, where I come from. But I know, don't hurt me, right?
But I can't see you.
But my question is, as someone who's a lifelong Brett Favre admirer, it's hard for me to get in your film, you kind of capture or state that he's not all that interested in what the fans think. I guess for me, I think his play would kind of negate that. When you see somebody that's as consistent and playing through pain and playing through personal tragedy and just sheer longevity. I guess my question is, what else other than his exemplary play or his loyalty? I'm sorry, it's not the right word.
I know what you mean.
You understand what I'm saying? What else can he give the fans? What else can he give them other than?
I think from some aspects, sometimes fans have a hard time separating the fact that these guys this is their profession. This is their job, and to a large degree, you're right. If he goes out there and plays hurt, plays week after week after week, that shows that he's deeply devoted to his job, and therefore has obviously a lot of care towards the fans. If you're willing to, he wore his heart on his sleeve, and I think that meant a lot. But I think that the point about fans not feeling appreciated was more specifically when he went to the Vikings. A lot of Packers fans just wanted him to simply stand up and say thank you. This is business. This isn't about a vendetta or a revenge, even though it may have been, but just to simply acknowledge how the fans felt and that they were hurt, that they were deeply wounded by what had happened, and just to say, I understand where you're coming from. This is a decision on my part. It's a decision on the Packers' part. But you'll forever be cherished. And he never really did that. I mean, there were some things he said, but I think a lot of us felt like he just moved on and never said much in the regard of acknowledging how Packers fans felt.
The only other thing I'd add there, too, is in the consecutive game streak, I've been told by people who know Brett really well that part of it is he's motivated by this sort of intense fear of failure. That, because he remembers back to 1992, Don Mikowski gets hurt in Cincinnati, he goes in. He never wanted to be the guy who got hurt one day and somebody took his job. As much as that would be ridiculous, once he's 10 years into an MVP career, that was still something that motivated him, was he wanted to be the guy who every week found a way to be out there, in part because he never wanted to be replaced.
And also, I'll just mention that saying that he didn't care about the Packers fans, I think is more making a point about when push came to shove, he didn't really care. It's not so much that he had malice towards Packers fans. I don't think anyone would argue that he had that in it originally, but it was just a disregard. He didn't really care, I think, is the argument that people were making. And personally, I don't think he owed anything to Packers fans necessarily. He could have saved himself a headache by doing just a little bit, potentially.
One last quick point. I think we wanted to make the point that it's not necessarily bad that he didn't care. It's part of the fan psychology that we were so hurt that he didn't care. And that's kind of what we want to get across, that, we felt like he didn't care, and to some degree that's sort of the I don't want to say negative psychology, but as a fan, something that you feel that you probably shouldn't, but you wind up feeling when you become that attached to a player.
I think we got time for a couple more. For Favre, or this group is against Favre?
I grew up only knowing Favre. I'm 30 years old, so Favre was the only quarterback I knew growing up in Wisconsin. My brother-in-law grew up knowing Mikowski Favre, and then my father knew them all. And you couldn't bring up Favre in the household after he retired, unretired, and got traded with the Vikings. It got heated. It was like discussing politics. It was such a hot subject to touch, and as I think it was just coming from different points of view. Knowing only Favre, knowing people who sat through the years of Lindy and Fonte, and even before that, it was just horrible. And then Favre came as a savior, and that's all I knew. And so when he left, it was one thing for me, the heartache, and then it was another thing for my dad, who it was just the whole thing. My brother-in-law was just, I think it was a little different for everybody.
Let's go back here. First of all, I want to congratulate you because I think it was very evenly done, evenly laid out the package side.
That really means a lot. Just that's one of the things we really worked at. So that really means a lot. Thank you.
Well, you should be congratulated. My question for you is you compiled all this information, and Tom, you probably have a better instinct of it because you ended up here. You were covering him there, and then you're back here. But after going through all the information that was there, who did you find more sympathetic after you got through the Packers or the Favres?
I think everybody screwed up.
I would agree with that. I don't think, I think the situation could have been handled a lot better. I think both sides made a lot of mistakes when it happened. I know that one of my personal favorite shots of the film is at the very end, he throws the incompletion in the last game at Lambeau Field. Al Michaels says this is likely how it ends for Favre at Lambeau, and there's just a look on his face where you can kind of see it's tangible that Favre knows it's over. Like this was his last hurrah, his last go. And as much emotion as I felt, and as much as I was so angry at him for leaving, there was a moment there, and it probably helped that the Packers beat him, but there was a moment there where I did feel some sympathy for him, in terms of this was a guy who did, for better or worse, I guess I should say, put his heart into everything, and it meant so much to him. And to see that look in his face, and it's like kind of like a horse going out to pasture. That's it. He did so much. He tried so hard, and that was it. I mean, I know he continued to play that season, but I really believe that was sort of that's what I'll remember is the final moment of his career. I'll put it that way.
I think we have one last question here.
I am a Packers fan, also living in Minnesota. I love the film. I thought it was great. I was curious though about the decision not to include some of the other elements that were going on in Favre's life at the time in that final season.
What's possibly be talking about?
I'm definitely talking about the issues with his wife and the sex thing, but also, the streak eventually ended, and the roof collapsing on the Metro. I mean, there's just so much going on that I was actually at that final game at Lambeau, and I very much wanted to see the Packers win. But there were so many shirts and signs in the crowd, with people sort of making light of his sexual transgressions and the whole thing, that there's almost a sense somewhere of feeling sort of sorry for him, I guess, or almost feeling like sort of embarrassed for him, or how he was tarnishing his legacy.
I told you there's going to be a sequel, right?
Yeah. that was one of the toughest decisions that we did have to make, but we made it very early on, that we weren't going to touch that because we felt that would open up a whole exactly. That would open up a whole other can of questions and things to get into, and just ultimately, given the story thrust, and I don't want to get too filmy, but given the story thrust and the arc we were telling the whole time, it couldn't have not felt a bit like a tangent in the third act to introduce all this stuff that comes at the last second. And so we are potentially going to work on a book that may include all that stuff, but it's basically, yeah. I mean, as for everything else that happened after this game, as far as I'm concerned, as a filmmaker, you end the movie. This is a saying, so I'm not calling Brett a monster, but you end the movie when the monster's dead. So like the game is over, it's done. We're not going to talk about the Super Bowl. We're not going to talk about anything that happened after that because you want to end the film on that high at the end. So it was more of a film decision than anything else. But.
I think to wrap things up, I just have one final question. What are your plans with the film, and what are you going to do with it from here? How can people tell other people to see it?
Yeah, that's the biggest. So we're pursuing distribution right now, which is kind of tricky. So basically, if you go obviously to our website, laststatelambeau.com. We're going to be showing it at other film festivals around the country. But really talking about it, tweeting about it, talking on Facebook about it, making a trend is a big thing. Distributors will see that, and they'll say there is a market for this, not just in Wisconsin. So talking about it as much as you can will really help us a lot. I think that's all I have to say, but I do want to mention we are going to be heading over. I forget the name of the bar now, but if we didn't get to your question, what?
Tubbs.
Tubbs. I guess right down the way here. So if we didn't get to your question, we'll be down there. I'll say no.